So revising is the most arduous task in the writing process. It definitely is. But editing is a very important part too. In editing, you're looking for the bigger problems that may have happened while you were revising, moving big chunks of text around, or things that you missed while you were revising. Editing is not necessarily looking for those little errors, but you might find some along the way. So one of the reasons why I keep these steps so distinctive, at least in the slideshow, even though there's probably going to be a lot of overlap between steps, is so that you have an understanding about the different functions of the writing process. So the idea behind editing is that you're focusing less on the ideas, those are the big picture parts of your essay, and more on how you're conveying those ideas. When you're editing, you're going to consider, do all of the ideas in the paper make sense? Are there unclear or confusing ideas or sentences? And overall, how does everything sound? Maybe you want to read it out loud and see how everything gels together. There is a big chance that when you are doing your revising, say shuffling around paragraphs or cutting ideas, that things didn't sound quite as polished anymore. So that would be a place where you would actually go in and start editing those sentences. Before or as you edit your paper, you'll want to read it out loud and listen for awkward pauses and unclear ideas. Cut out extra words, vagueness, as well as misused words. One of the most essential parts of editing is where you're tightening up and cleaning up your language. So when you read your paper out loud, here are some questions that you want to ask yourself. Does it sound awkward? If it does, there is likely a grammar issue. Make sure all sentences have a subject and a verb. In other words, a thing, the subject, doing something, doing being the verb. Does it convey the idea? Is there a way to make it more succinct or clear? Does each sentence sound good? Does it sound too jargony or conversational on the other hand? Is each word you use the best word for the thought you were trying to convey? And remember, there is no such thing as a synonym. Look up the definition of all words you use if you're unfamiliar with them. For instance, if it's a word that was suggested to you using a thesaurus. And once you're done tightening and cleaning up your language, then you're ready to do the final step, which is proofreading. So proofreading is the final thing you do before submitting. And this is after you have everything you want to say down. The language makes sense, everything is clear. This is where you're just looking for those small errors, including formatting errors, to make sure everything looks perfect before you send it off. Because proofreading is primarily about searching your paper for minor errors, it's very helpful to have a friend proofread your paper for you, in addition to yourself, of course. It's helpful because your friend or your peer or even a parent, they'll read over each sentence rather than gloss over it, which is what you'll probably do. They'll read each sentence because they're unfamiliar with the material. When you read your paper, because you're already familiar with what you want to say, just like in the revision process, you might not be looking at what you actually said, but only revisiting what you think you wanted to say. This is not the best way to find those little errors. Additionally, even though it is very helpful in the process, don't rely on spell check. So if you notice those little squiggly lines underneath the word spell check, the spell check on my computer thought this was spelled wrong. But when I originally did this PowerPoint on a different computer, it thought it was spelled correctly. So even spell checks can get things wrong. And if you have the time and resources, print out a hard copy to use when proofreading. Studies have shown that we're much better able to comprehend the printed word over a digital version of the same text, which obviously will just make proofreading that much easier. In fact, professional proofreaders and copy editors almost always work with a printed copy before they send a book off to publication. So we've talked a lot about proofreading, editing, and the first step, of course, which would be revision. And those are just some components of the entire writing process. So just as a recap, the writing process starts with research. Then you move on to brainstorming or coming up with ideas that you're going to be writing about. And that all happens before you actually sit down and write your first draft. You take your draft and you revise it thoroughly based on both your own ideas as well as possibly the feedback of others. And then before you're ready to send your paper off to a publisher or to your professor, you'll want to edit and proofread. And while there is overlap between the two of them, and they do piggyback off of each other, keep in mind that those are distinct steps. Good writing is revision intensive and requires a lot of time and thought. If you are systematic about writing your paper from start to finish, you can eliminate some of the logical and structural problems you might encounter in your revision. Proofreading is not the same as editing and is in fact the smallest step in the revision process. However, you should never hand in a paper to be graded that hasn't been proofread. In fact, papers with spelling and grammatical errors make the whole paper look bad, no matter how well thought out the entire paper is. In other words, every single step of the writing process is very important, large or small. If you really want to do the best on a paper, it's important to make sure that you do all of these steps. So as you complete different stages in the writing process, refer to the ideas in this PowerPoint to make sure that you're completing all of those steps and having the best paper possible. However, don't forget your book as a resource. You can refer to the writing guides at the end of the chapters in your book for additional advice. There's some great stuff in there on brainstorming, drafting, peer review, and revision. And each one of those sections is always tailored to the assignment at hand. And of course, if you have any questions or need any help along the way, feel free to chat or email with me. Have a good one!